Hello and welcome to ESL Best Practices for Teaching Vocabulary, our Lunch and Learn series. If you'd like to join us and access the slide deck, it's bit.ly/best practices ELs. Hello, my name is Kristen Adams. I'm a staff development facilitator at the Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate Unit. If you have any questions or anything after this presentation, feel free to stay on after our Lunch and Learn and we can have a further discussion, or you can email me at adamc@cliu.org. To get us started, I thought it would be important for all of us to look at some of the acronyms that are most commonly used. If you're not an ESL teacher, some of these things you might see and you should familiarize yourself with them. EL is an English learner, ESL, English as a second language, ELD is the English language development, and the ELP is their proficiency level that's based on the WIDA access level. If you have an ESL student in your classroom, it's important that you take a look at their WIDA access level and start to see how you can accommodate for that student in your classroom. Some of your Ls, they come from a language that is other than English. It could be many different languages. They may be able to speak proficiently in English. They may or may not be in the ELD program. They may be literate and not be literate in their primary language. They could speak several languages. They could have interrupted or limited schooling. They may also have been born in the United States, and English might not be their first language. If we talk about an ESL student, we have to consider something. Our Ls are expected to learn English and content at the same time. That's an extremely heavy lift and expectation. Their success is measured by two things, their English development and their academic achievement. So as our teachers, what can we do to help? Well, here's some best practices. No matter what student you teach, they're important. Building relationships, doing your best to include Ls in all aspects of your lesson, finding out what they can do, dismiss your assumptions and keep an open mind when working with those students, and don't misread their motivation. If we go back to what we started with, they're expected to learn content and language at the same time. That's exhausting. So when you see a student that seems like they're not motivated to learn, maybe they're exhausted from all that they're trying to do at the same time. So here's a few things that you can do to support them. Provide daily opportunities to engage in speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Make content accessible, making sure that it's age and grade level appropriate. You can simplify some of your speech, the rate in which you speak, and some of the visuals that you use. And do your best to communicate and collaborate with your ESL teacher and your regular ed teacher as often as possible. When you're planning for the student, some of the things that you want to keep in mind, you want to start to think of what can my Ls do? What might be challenging and what supports should I put in place so that they can access the content? When we look at the levels of English language proficiency, we want to make sure that we're not just looking at the overall composite score for the access. We want to look at each one. We want to look at listening, speaking, reading, and writing. When we go to plan, we want to look at what level they are in each of those specific content domains so that we can best meet their needs. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is vocabulary. And one of the things that's critical for understanding vocabulary is through activating their background knowledge. When we activate it and we give them something they already know and attach it to something new, we're helping to build their vocabulary and build their background knowledge at the same time. It's a critical step in the learning process. So for example, when you're building background knowledge, you want to make sure that you're using language that's inclusive to all of your students. Instead of saying, you know, when you went to Dorney Park, don't assume that they've been to an amusement park. Put a real life picture of what it would look like to be in an amusement park. Have you ever been to an amusement park? We want to make sure that when we ask questions, we're allowing for everyone in the classroom to be able to access the information and find success. If you're starting off talking about an amusement park or a roller coaster with no pictures or no realia, then your students are already at a deficit. So make sure that you use the pictures, use objects, use your Google Classroom, use Google Slides, incorporate as much as possible information so that students can get a clear picture of what you want them to learn. You could take your students on a virtual field trip. just to get them started. There's so many ways to connect things that are unknown and build their background at the same time. We want to make sure that when we're teaching vocabulary, we're going to explicitly build. So take a look at this picture. We could start by using sentence stems, getting them started of how to respond. This reminds me of, it looks like, I know that. Having students given part of what you're asking, either the question stem or the sentence stem, you are allowing students to start to process the language and learn vocabulary at the same time. When you start to think about teaching a unit on fishing, you need to start to think about what are the words if I were going to be teaching fishing that they would need to be able to access in order to understand what fishing even means or is. There's a few ways to do this. So if I were taking some of the key things, let's just say I'm talking about fishing, the reel, a hook, a tackle box, a rod. What you could do, you could have either, depending on your student's level, a draw, a line and connect, or a quick write. We're going to start with the word, the hook. How many of you have ever used a hook before? Which of these pictures exemplify a hook? Have students write down what they know. If you have a lower level English student, they could even just draw a line and connect. When we're building background knowledge, we're helping build that glue that holds all of those ideas and content together. And our job is really to make sure that the curriculum that they need to access is comprehensible. We want to improve their comprehension. We want to give them access to the things that they're learning. So we need to look at the 3 tiers of vocabulary. If we look at the largest tier at the bottom, that is our tier 1 vocabulary. Those are things that every single day that students are having access to. When we move up to the tiers, we go to our general language. When we look at the general academic language, those are things that students need to know in order to access the academic language. And then it gets even more specific with our tier 3 words. Those are domain specific language. So for example, we're going to take a look at this. When we're planning for vocabulary, we want to make sure that we are implicitly or explicitly teaching. It depends. So some of the things are on the fly. A student comes to an unfamiliar word in text. You could stop right there and explain that word. But in order for vocabulary to really be concrete, we need a systematic approach. It needs to be direct and engaging. So I want you to think about the vocabulary that you're teaching. Which of those words you need to teach explicitly? On this previous slide, when it looks at our academic list, right here's you can find them all over the internet, but here's a great academic word list. So let's say these are some of the academic words that your students are going to come across. Which of these do you need to make sure that students need to know in order to access the curriculum? Now, when it comes to your specific content, math, science, social studies, we all have domain-specific language. So we want to make sure we teach that as well. So those all would be in the explicit. So we want a systematic, direct approach to teaching the vocabulary. So here are a few ideas to get you started. There are many ideas for teaching vocabulary. The most important thing I want you to think through is what activities you have that teach students vocabulary in a systematic way, that teach them to not only understand the word, but to be able to apply it to the new content. Do you use pictures? Do you use a word of the day? Do you introduce the word and connect it with a synonym and antonym? The most important is that you're looking at that sentence in context. So when you're teaching a new word, find out where it is in that text or in that article or the assignment and show them the entire sentence so that they can take a look at what that means in context. Because as you know, words mean different things at different times. Here's a primary example of just something simple that you could have students write. A dog is blank. These are facts. This is what it looks like in a sentence. These are examples. When we get to students in the upper grades, there are the Freyer model. And if you click on the link, it will actually take you to a Jamboard that uses the same thing. You could post this in your Google Classroom, or you could use it if you're teaching online or in class, and students can jam along with you. They could type in their word They can give a definition, characteristics, and examples and non-examples. That's a huge part of the FRAYER model, and it's a great way for solidifying vocabulary. The KIM technique is a technique that you teach your students when you're starting out. Let's say you're explaining the word real. If you're talking about fishing in the story that you're about to read, you would have your students write K-I-M. If you see in the right-hand picture, they would do the keyword, information, and memory clue. This is perfect for math vocabulary as well. What is a quadrilateral? Oh, it has 4 straight sides. Draw one. This helps students quickly identify the word, give information that is important, and then draw some type of picture or memory clue to help them remember that word moving forward. There are lots of vocabulary ideas. I'm going to leave you with the slide deck so you can take a look at some of the cognates. You can look at some tips for creating word walls, for scaffolding, and for looking at math and scientific word parts. All of those are great resources for you to access if you're looking for ideas. This is a great way to help students see how our language grows and is interconnected. Visuwords.com, if you have your students go to that to explore a word, click on explore. Let's say you want to have them use the word explain. Explain can mean many different things, as you can see. You want them to state or tell. If you go from explain and go, if you hover over top, it tells you what it means. You could see that it's the verb, and if you double click, it will expand it even more. Maybe you want your students to not use the word explain, but you want them to use a synonym in their writing. You want them to replace it. This is a great way for them to access language. So here's just a few things I want to leave you with. Remember, our job as educators is to include and engage ELs as you would any other student. Use your We Can Do descriptors to scaffold the instruction, making sure that you look at all the domains: reading, speaking, listening, and writing. Know that schools may be your EL's only opportunity to practice English. So think about that when you're teaching new things. Vary your rate, vary your tone, bring in realia and objects to allow them to experience that in your classroom. And beyond all things, practice patience, because there is no magic bullet. Students will continue to gain and grow their vocabulary when they're given multiple opportunities in different ways to practice it. Here's an idea that you can use that will help us recap this section. This is called a cloze. In a cloze, you leave blanks in a sentence and you allow for your students to make meaning. So let's see how you did today. Make sure all your ELs feel blank and blank in your classroom. So make sure all your ELs feel welcomed and included in your classroom. Students who appear unmotivated are not lacking blank, but might be blank. So remember, they might not be lacking motivation. They might be exhausted, tired, or maybe even confused on the topic and need some more scaffolding. Best practices for ELs include blank, blank, and blank. Realia, activating background knowledge, building vocabulary. And the last one, always do your best to blank with other staff about English language learners. And the answer would be collaborate. So great job today on following along with us. I hope you gained some resources to help you access vocabulary. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me, follow me on Twitter. I will be posting this presentation for our Lunch and Learn on our YouTube channel. Feel free to listen along with us, add your comments and ideas. Thank you so much for making sure that our students, especially our ELs, can do and are successful in the curriculum. And by making this curriculum comprehensible, by building vocabulary, by teaching it in a systematic way, we are helping our English language learners not only develop their English skills, but solidify it and make it more concrete. So thank you for all you're doing, and I hope to see you in one of our professional development sessions soon.